Welcome to Hort Culture, where a group of extension professionals and plant people talk about the business, production, and joy of planting seeds and helping them grow. Join us as we explore the culture of horticulture. Hey everybody, Ray and I are back for another mini episode.
Mini episodes.
Many
Actually, number two.
Number two. And we just kind of thought, let's come at this as something that we're excited about or makes us happy, or in my case today, something that I deep dive down a rabbit hole, but I am no expert
Not
in.
you, Alexis. No, not a rabbit hole.
Yeah, me. I'm just so curious, and it's kind of going a popular topic going around in the flower world, and so me being a nerd has tried to deep dive. But anyways, what we're talking about today is, or what I'm gonna monologue and occasionally let Ray ask questions about.
As Ray gets curious about some of
He's
these
like,
topics.
what are
Yeah.
you talking about?
Yeah.
Is kind of the idea of alternative composting. And so more specifically, Bokashi is something that is what I am deep diving on, which is from what I have read and understand is kind of got Korean base there, and is a type of composting that's anaerobic. And we'll talk a little bit about vermicomposting, which I am pretty comfortable with. I'm staring at my vermicompost bin now that I think I've had this thing for 10 years now, because I remember I did this bin the year I started an extension at a talk, and I've had the same worm bin.
So
And
do you empty it occasionally and just use
yeah.
like part of the stuff that's in there as a starter? How do you work
So
that vermicompost bin?
my vermicompost bin is the most simple one. In fact, someone gave me like a fancy one that was, like a technical vermicompost bin. And vermicompost, if you're like, what the heck is that? It's worm composting, and something that you would do indoors. It's done with red wiggler worms, which are not
Specific type, I guess.
it's a specific type, and they don't like super high temperatures or super low temperatures. So it's usually something that's done indoors or in a barn that doesn't freeze, that kind of stuff. But anyways, so I've had a fancy vermicompost bin, and I did not succeed with it the first time. But the one I've had for 10 years now is two like plastic totes, one nests inside the other one. I've got and that's it. Like there's holes in one so that it drains into the other one, and that's it.
And you
But yeah.
do you actively throw your stuff, like your organic scraps that's appropriate?
Yes.
Do you just toss them in there or
Yeah,
what?
so I usually have a banana or an apple or some sort of fruit on the way to work, so that automatically goes in there. And then we collect all the coffee grounds at my house, and so I'll bring those in, every other week or something like that, and put them in. And then my staff, we have two paper shredders, just small paper shredders here at the office, and one is for paper, like non shiny paper, only. And so it's the shredded stuff that goes in there, newspapers, that kind of stuff. And then just the occasional, like, there's actually a sign in my office on our staff refrigerators that's like, hey, if you've got any, leftover veggies, the worms will take them. And so people will come in and be like, can I feed the worms? So
And you use this stuff like you would regular compost, the finished compost? Is that what you're
yeah,
doing? Just kind of taking it, putting it on some deserving soil somewhere?
yeah, so
Yeah.
it's only a small amount, just because it's only in totes. If I was doing this on a
Sure,
large
yeah.
scale, and more actively, they're more of a passive, fun thing to have, and I get to use. The kids love it and stuff like that. But um, I like to use it actually in like my potting soil mixes. And one of the things I really love that comes out of it is like the tea, quote unquote tea, that comes out. Compost tea, a lot of people have heard of. That's
I
true of
call it worm drippings.
worm
Yeah.
worm
Sounds
worm drippings.
provocative. Castings, yeah.
So I actually have been using those because you get a lot of that a lot faster than you do the regular compost. You get that tea comes about, and I actually have started using that as the wetting agent for my potting soil media, which kind of leads me to like my overall fascination for the day of like microbial production, and how I don't know, in my very traditional training of horticulture, we were sort of led to believe in the production area of horticulture, not necessarily in this in the soil production, but the, seeding and transplants and all that kind of stuff that everything has to be super sterile, right? Like, got to have super sterile media. It's got to be, you got to, wear gloves sometimes. Like, there's this whole, everything has to be really, bleached and cleaned, which there is a basis for that, right? With pathogens and all this negative, bad stuff that can come about. And nobody wants to, have a super dirty little greenhouse operation. But there's this idea that I've come to through all of this research I've been doing on Bokashi, which, like I said, is that fermented compost essentially, and like vermicompost and stuff, that like microbial life is good. And we know this to be true when we're working with like true like soils out in the field or in a high tunnel or wherever. We're like, yeah, we got to build up the microbes. We got to make them happy. We got to give them compost. But like it's like, why are we completely sterile until we get to that point? Like, if microbes are so good, then why are we not using them in the right microbes in, production, like production systems? And so I just found that kind of fascinating, just because in my brain, as someone who's kind of traditionally trained, it was always like everything must be sterile potting mix, blah blah blah. um
And you said that was an anaerobic process, which
yeah so
interested me. That's really
mhm.
different than any composting I've ever done.
Yeah, so jumping away from like Bokashi or I'm sorry, from vermicompost for a second, they can link together, which is why I kind of talk about them together. But so
Compost.
yeah, compost. So Bokashi is fermented food, and so it's an anaerobic process that ferments. And so what happens, and why Bokashi can be really great, especially if you're like small, and you don't have an area where you really can compost. Maybe you live in an apartment or just a small area and you have like some pots or a garden or something like that. Bokashi can be really great for you, kind of no matter what your size is. And I feel like I should stipulate this with, I have not done this personally, but I really want to. And so here is what I have learned thus far. um, Through this. So Bokashi is small to large scale, and the other cool thing is that you can use any food product. So usually when we're talking about vermicompost or regular composting, we say don't put your meat products in there. With Bokashi, because you're fermenting it, you actually can use meat products. So it's one way to help reduce food waste. And like, one thing you'll see when you start looking up Akashi is all like the crazy amounts of food waste that there is. It's like US is like 40% of the food we buy is wasted, which is crazy. And if you compare, like, I think I read the average like American slash European, right? So like those types of countries waste like 200 pounds of food a year. And then if you compare that to like Asia and like South America, it's like 11 pounds of food, like huge difference.
Food is not cheap, people. Food
Yeah.
is
And
not cheap.
so, this is kind of a way to deal with that, regardless of your scale. So anyway, so in Bokashi, you're taking all of this leftover food, and you're putting it into a airtight bin that you're layering, kind of like lasagna, layering in a some type of bran. They usually use a bran that has been inoculated with these um, fermentation microbes, right? These like lactic acid microbes, all these guys who love to be an anaerobic, which is, non-air, non-oxygen filled environments. And you're layering that like lasagna. And so you have a bucket. You can have a fancy bucket or a non-fancy bucket. The fancy buckets have spigots on them. So it's really very simple. You layer your food in with this bran layer, you fill it up to the top, you pop the lid on, getting as much air kind of out as possible, and you wait 2 weeks. You don't have to open it, you don't have to stir it, you don't have to do anything. And because it's airtight, there's no smell, and there's no oxygen in there, right? So there's no smell. So you wait 2 weeks, and then you open it up and everything's fermented. It kind of, I'm told from everything I've read, has sort of like a vinegary smell, which makes sense, but is nothing really off-putting. And then you actually bury that, or you feed it to worms. So I've seen some larger operations have vermicompost, like large worm farms. Worm farms is a funny thing to say, but they also have this Bokashi going on, and they feed their Bokashi to their worms just because that makes sense. But they also will bury it, and so you bury it about 6 to 8 inches deep. In a pot, in your raised beds, in your field, wherever. A lot of people, when they're doing it in field production, will make like a 6 inch trench, and then they're going to dump this fermented food down in this trench, cover it back up, and within 2 weeks of it being buried, it's completely gone. So all of those nutrients are then available to the plant. You can plant kind of right. You can seed stuff right on top of it if you want to. Like if you have a pot and you put your Bokashi in there, you put a couple inches of potting soil on top, and then you put your seeds or your plants in. That's totally fine as well. Um, and I just think that's fascinating. So essentially, in a month, you've converted everything into plant available nutrients versus when a
Yeah,
lot
that's
of
a
us
faster process, yeah.
yeah, when a lot of us are like doing home composting, right? Like, I mean, I have like a tumbler that gets hot and, but it's not, I know it's not going to be ready. I'd be lucky if it's ready in a year. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like and that's
6
fine.
months and months, yeah.
Right. If you're the kind of person who's like turning a big compost bin, keeping temperature and stuff like that, then, you're not super impressed by a month. But for like the other 90% of us who are like, yeah, sure, I'll have a compost bin, this is a really cool way. And you can still use it, still creates like that tea that I was talking about, which is why you can put a spigot on it that you can dilute and use that as a fertilizer for plants. Um,
It
I
sounds like an
just,
interesting process because it's
yeah.
so different than like,
Mhm.
anaerobic is a bad word when it comes to traditional
Yeah.
composting, so it makes sense to me. You said that you're using specific types of, microorganisms
Mhm.
in that process, because I know if your traditional compost pile goes anaerobic, you get, hydrogen sulfide gas as a
Yeah.
byproduct, which rotten eggs smell, not
Stank.
desirable, so you're using really specific, like, ingredients,
Mhm.
microbes in this
Mhm.
process. And you have to order those, you said? Like, you can order those specifically?
You can produce them yourself. Usually you start with like it's sort of like a sourdough starter idea,
Okay,
right? And
yeah.
so like you can order them. They last a really long time, and you can
Mhm.
create a lot of this Bokashi from just a little bit of this bran. And it's there's it depends on what you put in it as the nutrient level for it, because I'm always looking at that. And so obviously if you're using a lot of banana peels, your phosphorus levels are probably or your potassium levels are probably going to be higher, but or eggshells, your calciums, but kind of on average, it's like about like a 2% kind of across the board is what I saw, which is pretty comparable to a lot of organic things that you're going to put on your garden. But I think what compost does that I don't think we acknowledge enough is that I've stopped thinking of compost as a fertilizer and more of a soil like amendment. Like it's there to
Yeah,
improve the
lower in
quality.
nutrients, yeah.
Right. It's really not high in nutrients, which the nutrients had like it's not bad, but it's there more to make sure that the environment is good for microbes that can make nutrients more available. It's kind of how I think of it. Like I don't know if you've always thought that, or if you've recently kind of had a change
Yeah,
of heart or
no, nutrient over time, I've come to believe that, when I'm adding soil amendment, it is a soil amendment, the nutrient levels in most compost, and there's been some studies that we have some data on that, sometimes when I go over this data with people and they're like, "Oh, well, then why am I putting it on? It's so low in
Mhm.
actual, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, our macronutrients. It's so low." Well, that's not the point of compost.
Mhm.
It's to improve the physical structure of the soil. It improves its water holding capacity.
Right.
It does so many more things. And what nutrients that are available in compost tend to be really, really high quality,
Mhm.
low in quantity, high in quality. And I'll take that.
Yeah.
Plus, you get all these other benefits of increasing organic matter, which increases water holding and nutrient holding capacity
Mhm.
in itself. So, yeah, there's all these other reasons to use compost. And this process you're talking about it sounds like it's almost like an intermediate process where it accelerates the breakdown.
Mhm.
And then did you say you put it in the soil and then it finishes
Yeah,
decomposition?
yeah, it's
Yeah.
So Bokashi, you're gonna put it in your bucket. You're gonna wait 2 weeks, and then you will take that out and you're gonna bury it. So 6 to 8 inches. It's just so animals and stuff like that don't
Oh,
get in
yeah.
there.
Gotcha.
And then within 2 weeks, it should be gone. Like you're not going to see it anymore. So because that stuff is already fermented, a lot of that breakdown has already happened. And so once it gets into the soil with the soil's microbes, it's a rapid thing.
My
And so
my brain is translating all these things that you're saying, which I'm not familiar with this process. My brain is translating that into a pressure cooker. It's
yeah,
like
sort of,
pressure
yeah.
cooking. I mean, that's really cool because you're accelerating because all these advertisements for tumblers and stuff saying it makes finished compost in 4 weeks. I don't think
Hmm.
that's true. It takes typically months, but the process
Hmm.
you're talking about is significantly different than what
Yeah,
I'm
it should
familiar with.
really be, if you're doing it right and layering and putting,
Mhm.
just following
It's
the basic
faster.
directions. You're looking at nutrients available to the plant and the plant having better, getting all those amendment things we were talking about within a month, which is incredible. And it's a way to use more of your food scraps because you can use like meat products and stuff like that. I saw someone use the term, and I wish I could remember who it was so I could give them credit for this, but almost like a probiotic. And so you're thinking about Bokashi or vermicompost, compost in general, as like a probiotic for your plants. Where like when we take probiotics, right, we know we're not taking like it's not like we're taking a vitamin, right? When we take a vitamin, we're taking straight nutrients like a fertilizer, right? Versus probiotic enables your body and those microbes in your body to break down food better and to
Supporting the ecosystem,
supporting
yeah.
the ecosystem,
Yeah.
right? And so that's, I think, a better way to think about compost. And what made a lot of sense when I was thinking about this, like fermented, stuff. But I just thought it was so cool. And there's like so many easy. The other thing is like it doesn't have to be expensive, and so you can convert this. And there's this one. I heard about this initially on a podcast called No Till Farmers, and Jenny Love has a episode with, I think it's a BLH Farm, and he does bokashi and vermicomposting both on large scales. And one way he's incorporated that is that they grow mushrooms and some microgreens and flowers. It's kind of their big crops. And so they deliver as part of like I guess a CSA or something. They deliver to homes, and they give those houses buckets that they can put their food scraps in that then he can use in bokashi. So he
So it's not like
drops
it's one I
off.
was trying to figure out the one large, huge airtight container, but
Yeah.
that's not it.
Yeah,
He's using
he's
small containers and then accumulates those.
so
Yeah,
he's yeah,
gotcha.
he's getting these small containers from people once a week full of food, and then he's taking them back and he's getting those big 95-gallon rolling dumpsters or whatever, that the ones you use at home. And
Oh, yeah.
he's put an airtight gasket on this, and there's videos out there like for this. It's not super difficult. He's just putting like a rubber gasket around the top of that with like some bungee cords, and he like drills and puts a spigot in the bottom, and then it wheels so it's easy to move around and when he needs to dump it. And so then he's dumping these 5-gallon buckets that he's getting from people's homes every week into these big 95-gallon ones, and like every 2 weeks it's got compost he's putting down in his. And he's like a big no-till farmer, regenerative farmer, so it's like really important to his ecosystem to have kind
Kinda
of this
community
source.
supported at its purest form,
Yeah,
community
yeah.
supported composting, yeah.
It's
Uh,
I'm fascinated. And so, anyways, you can buy like these small, just like the vermicompost
yeah,
bins. You
how
can
do you
buy.
spell this? Because I need to look this up and see what these containers look like. Do you have a
Yeah,
spelling? Because if I try to spell Bokashi, it's
it's
gonna
the
be bad.
way you think. No, it's the way it's
Oh, is it
Bokashi,
okay.
Bokashi. So there's not a lot of usually, we're an extension here, so we like to use our science base. There's only a couple .orgs that I was able to find, and they had some good information, good research on it. There's kind of this idea of like kitchen bokashi, which is what I've been talking about, versus like the true traditional bokashi, which is using more manure. It's not really in bins. It's kind of on a large scale. That's a little bit different. But so there's just these little, like they look like little square buckets that have a spigot on the bottom and have an airtight gasket on the top, and that's it. Like you
It's a
just
compost pressure cooker.
it's a
That's
compost
my
pressure
brain is
cooker.
locked in on that.
Yeah. I
I'm gonna have
love
to
that.
learn
I'm
more.
glad you said
Yeah.
that. It's so cool and fascinating. And anyway, so bringing me back to this idea of like using this tea or using the I mean not going to want to put Bokashi. It needs to be with the some sort of soil. You're not going to put that in like a potting mix, but you could certainly use the tea, like a diluted tea for your plants. You could feed your worms that if you're doing that. That's what this guy does too, because he's got so much fermented Bokashi, he feeds it to his worms. And so they break it down even faster. So then you get worm castings and vermicompost even faster than you would with, normal kitchen scraps. Um, but this idea that like microbes are so good, and why did we think that they were bad, or why have we kept them out of a lot of production systems? It's like we kind of thought if we, there's just bad ones, so we must eliminate them all. It's like I don't know. It's
Take
this
a sound environmental concept or a scientific concept, and then we
yeah.
apply it to everything
Yeah.
unilaterally, and sometimes that gets us into trouble. Yeah.
Yeah, it's been kind of a fascinating thing. So I'm gonna try. One of my goals for 2024 is to try Bokashi and see
We
what
need to
happens.
follow up on this to see how your compost pressure cooker square bucket system experiment goes. Because I wanna know, because
Yeah.
anaerobic, I'm thinking rotten egg smell. I know
Uh
that this
huh.
is a different system,
Yep.
and it's interesting because you're using specific starters
Mhm.
in there,
Mhm.
which is interesting, but
Mhm.
yeah, something totally I am
Well,
totally unfamiliar with.
go. If you're listening and this sounds fascinating, or maybe something that you could actually do in your system, or think that would help you, go look it up. Do your own research on that. I am trying. I am learning more and more, and we have a great professor now at UK who's specializing in kind of like microbes and fermentation, Dr. Corbin, and she seems really, really cool. And she's doing a presentation at the Organic Association of Kentucky with two other great professors that I'm hoping she's going to hint a little bit more on kind of this microbe world that we have been kind of forgetting about for a long time. So maybe I'll have more information to share with you all in the future if you want a deep dive, or we'll have Kendall on to be amazing and teach us all about fermentation and microbes in the plant world. But yeah, go look it up. Be curious. Stay curious out there. I don't know, that's some podcast they say that,
Just
which I think
another
is
form of
awesome.
composting that's gonna add to what you already know.
Awesome. Yeah. Give your soil some probiotics is what we're doing. But anyways, if you like this episode, please let us know. Leave us a review. Shoot us a message on Instagram at Hort Culture Podcast. You can shoot us an email at hortculturepodcast@l.uky.edu. That should also be in the show notes for you. If you're like, I cannot remember that, Alexis, I understand. And we hope that as we grow this podcast, you will grow with us and join us for some more mini episodes with Brett and Josh. Have a great one, y'all.